All right, so welcome to the deep dive. You know how it works by now. You're curious about something, you send us the sources, and we jump in.
Yeah, we really dig deep, try to get to the heart of things, give you the most important insights without bogging you down. Today's journey, though, uh, this is a heavy one.
It is definitely a lot to process here. We're looking at the information surrounding Jeffrey Dahmer, the notorious serial killer.
Right, and the sources you all sent, we got the Wikipedia page, which, pretty comprehensive overview of his life and the crimes. Plus this really interesting paper from the NIH, Micro Disasters, the case of serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Kind of gives us a different angle.
Yeah, two pretty distinct perspectives on this case, but that's kind of the point here, right? We want to navigate all this information, there's a lot of it, without shying away from the difficult stuff, but also, without sensationalizing.
Exactly. No hype. Just a clear and balanced look at what these sources tell us. So much to unpack, though. Where do we even start with a case this complex?
Right. Well, I mean, a good starting point is always the beginning, right? Like his early life, trying to see if there are any clues, any formative experiences.
Yeah, the early years are crucial, for sure. And, I mean, there's no shorting of information on his childhood in these sources.
Okay, so let's lay the groundwork here. We've got Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, born May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Fairly typical middle-class family, at least at first.
Yeah. His dad, Lionel, was a chemistry student, went on to become a chemist later on. And his mom, Joyce, taught people how to use teletype machines.
Interesting detail. And the Wikipedia entry actually goes into their family history, too. German and Welsh on his father's side, Norwegian and Irish on his mother's.
Yeah, but you know what's fascinating? The description of his early childhood. It actually started pretty normally. Wikipedia says he was energetic and a happy kid.
Really? Huh. It's almost hard to believe considering what he became, right? But then around 4 years old, he had hernia surgery and he kind of changed, became much more quiet.
Yeah, subdued. By elementary school, they described him as timid, and his teacher even noted some potential signs of abandonment.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, you have to wonder how his family dynamic, his parents' relationship maybe, might have played a role. The sources mention his dad being away for his studies a lot and his mom's health issues.
Right, and she had some struggles during her pregnancy with Jeffrey's younger brother, David. You gotta think all that probably added to a sense of instability in their home.
And then, of course, they moved a couple of times, adding to that instability, I guess. First to Doylestown, Ohio in 66, then Bath Township, Ohio in 68. They say Jeffrey got to pick his little brother's name, David. Interesting little tidbit. But in Bath Township, that's where things start to get different.
Yeah, and this is where you really start seeing behaviors that are not typical for a kid his age. This fascination with dead animals. He'd collect insects and animal skeletons in a hut in the woods behind their house.
Yeah, preserving the remains with formaldehyde. Okay, that's definitely not your average kid's bug collection, right?
Not even close.
Hmm.
And it seems this wasn't just a passing curiosity. There's an incident mentioned about a dog.
Oh, yeah, it was decapitated. And he displayed the body and the skull in the woods. I mean, how do you even...
It's disturbing,
Yeah.
right? And it goes beyond just wanting to see how things work.
For sure. And then around 16, he starts having these fantasies about, like, attacking a male jogger, knocking him unconscious for sexual purposes.
Trying to actually ambush this jogger with a baseball bat. Really chilling to think about that shift from thought to action.
Absolutely. But at school, he was known as, like, the class clown, staging these elaborate pranks they called doing a Dahmer, even faking seizures.
It's almost like he had this double life, this public persona that masked these dark, disturbing thoughts. There's a common theme in these kinds of cases,
Totally. The NIH paper, they talk about that, how some individuals who commit these extreme acts, they can compartmentalize, present a very different face to the world.
Exactly. And, the Wikipedia entry also mentions that things weren't great at home during this time. Right before he graduated high school, his mom left with his younger brother, David. Didn't even tell his dad.
And then his parents' divorce was finalized shortly after. Joyce got custody of David, and Jeffrey was left alone in the house.
Wow. Think about that. 18 years old, just graduated high school, and basically abandoned.
Yeah.
That's got to leave a mark, right?
No kidding. And shortly after all that, he commits his first murder.
Yeah. June of 78, Stephen Hicks. Dahmer picks him up hitchhiking, offers him a ride back to his parents' house.
And that's where it all starts. His own account of what happened is just terrifying.
He said Hicks wanted to leave, and he couldn't let that happen. He hit Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell twice then strangled him.
And then, I mean, the details are so gruesome. He masturbated over the body, then dismembered it in the basement, buried the remains in the backyard, but then he dug them up, used acid to remove the flesh.
Flushed the flesh down the toilet, crushed the bones, scattered them in the woods, disposed of Hicks's necklace and knife in the Cuyahoga River.
Just the level of planning, the steps he took to try and hide his crime, it's chilling. The NIH paper makes a good point about this. The fact that even in this first murder, he was so methodical, it suggests he was already capable of a level of control and premeditation that's really disturbing.
And then, right after this, he enrolls at Ohio State University. Doesn't last long, though, 3 months. Alcohol becomes a huge problem.
Flunked almost every class except for riflery, which, knowing what we know now, is pretty unsettling. He drops out, then enlists in the Army in '79, becomes a medical corpsman.
But the drinking follows him there too, right? And he ends up with an honorable discharge in '81 because of it.
Then it's off to Miami Beach, tries to make it on his own, works at a deli, but gets evicted for not paying rent, ends up back in Ohio in September of '81. Back to square one, basically.
Back living with his father and stepmother. Still drinking heavily. Gets arrested for being drunk and disorderly. Sounds like his dad was trying to get him some help with the alcohol, but it wasn't really working.
Yeah. So they send him to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin, hoping a change of scenery, and maybe his grandma's influence could help him get back on track.
Makes sense. Seemed like he had a decent relationship with his grandmother. Maybe that stability would make a difference.
But unfortunately, it doesn't. Gets arrested for indecent exposure at the State Fair Park in '82. Gets a job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory in '85, so that's something at least.
Yeah, but it's around this time that those disturbing thoughts start to creep back in. The Wikipedia entry mentions an encounter at a library. Someone propositioned him, and it seemed to trigger those old fantasies about control and dominance.
Oh, right. And he starts going to gay bars and bathhouses in Milwaukee, starts stealing a male mannequin.
His grandmother found it. He was using it for sexual gratification. It's like he was trying to exert some kind of twisted control, manifest these fantasies in the real world.
Yeah. And then he starts getting frustrated with his partners moving during sex. So what does? He starts drugging them with sleeping pills mixed with alcohol.
Yeah, incapacitating them. He gets banned from the bathhouses for that. But then he just moves this whole thing to hotel rooms. The pattern here is clear, right? He keeps escalating, adapting his behavior. It's scary how calculated it all seems.
Oh, absolutely. And there's this truly creepy detail from this time. He apparently had this idea of stealing a freshly buried corpse. Even tried to dig up a coffin, but couldn't because the ground was too hard. His mind was going to some really dark places.
And then in '86, he gets arrested again. This time for masturbating in front of 2 12-year-old boys. Gets probation and has to go to counseling. This feels like a point where intervention could have made a difference.
Yeah, you'd hope so, right? But it didn't.
Well,
Less than a year later, November of '87, he commits his second murder at the Ambassador Hotel.
Stephen Tuomi. Dahmer said he didn't remember killing him, just woke up and found Tuomi dead.
His chest was crushed. And then, again, he takes the body back to his grandmother's house, dismembers it. This time, though, he tries to preserve the skull, boiled it in soilax and bleach.
The skull eventually became brittle and he pulverized it. It's like, what's going on here? What does this even mean? The NIH paper suggests this might be about, like, possessing his victims, even if it's just a part of them.
Yeah, like a trophy, almost. And Dahmer himself said that Tuomi's murder was a turning point for him, that after that, he just stopped trying to resist his urges.
And that leads to a whole string of murders at his grandmother's house.
Yeah.
January '88, James Dockstader lures him with an offer for money to pose for nude pictures. March '88, Richard Guerrero, same story. Both drugged, strangled, dismembered.
He tried to keep their skulls too, but they ended up too brittle, so he crushed them. It's like a pattern starts to emerge, a horrifying ritual.
And he's getting bolder, too. In April '88, there's Ronald Flowers Jr. He drugs him but doesn't kill him because his grandmother interrupts. Actually ends up taking Flowers to the hospital.
Wow. Just imagine being his grandmother during all this. You think you're giving him a safe space to get better and this going on under your roof. It's insane. And then she asked him to move out in September of '88.
He finds a place on North 24th Street. And almost as soon as he moves in, he's arrested. This time for drugging and sexually assaulting a 13-year-old boy. He's convicted, gets a pretty serious charge.
Second-degree sexual assault, enticing a child. But his sentencing gets suspended. And in March of '89, he's allowed to move back in with his grandmother while he's on a break from work. Hard to believe he was allowed back there after that conviction.
Yeah, major failure of the system there. And while he's back at his grandmother's, guess what? He kills again. March 89, Anthony Sears.
Met at a gay bar. Wikipedia says Dahmer found Sears exceptionally attractive, and that seemed to trigger his violent urges. This one's even more disturbing because he starts keeping body parts.
Yeah, this is a big shift. He takes Sears' head and genitalia, preserves them in acetone, stores them in a wooden box. This isn't just about killing anymore. It's about possession, trophies.
So messed up. And he actually gets sentenced for the assault, probation, and a year in the House of Correction. But he gets paroled early, moves back in with his grandma for a bit, then finally gets his own apartment on North 25th Street in May of 1990. Takes Sears' remains with him.
And the murders at his new apartment, they start almost immediately. May 1980, Raymond Smith. The details are, I don't even know. He photographs the body, dismembers it, boils some of the bones, dissolves the rest in acid, keeps the skull. It's like a horrifying routine now.
Yeah, the NIH paper mentions the photography, how it seems like he needs to document and relive his acts. It's so creepy.
And there's a close call that month, too. He accidentally drugs himself, and the guy he was going to target robs him. But it doesn't stop him. June 90, Edward Smith. But this time he accidentally destroys the skull while trying to dry it in the oven. He actually regretted that. Can you believe that?
It's like he's attached to these skulls, needs to have them. September 90, Ernest Miller. This one's even worse. He actually eats parts of Miller's body. The heart, liver, biceps, thighs. Preserves the skeleton, paints the skull. This is cannibalism now, on top of everything else.
He said he did it out of curiosity at first, but later felt it made the victims a permanent part of him. It's so disturbing. Then, same month, he kills David Thomas, but this time he doesn't keep any body parts, just photographs of the dismemberment. It's almost like he's experimenting, trying different things.
And then there's this period of about 5 months where he doesn't kill anyone. He even tells his probation officer about feeling anxious, depressed, even suicidal. It's almost like he's struggling with what he's becoming.
But it doesn't last. The murders in 1991, they ramp up again. February 91, Curtis Straughter. April 91, Errol Lindsay. This is where he starts using that horrific drilling technique.
Oh God, drilling holes in their skulls and injecting hydrochloric acid. Lindsay actually woke up after that. Can you imagine? Dahmer re-drugged him and strangled him, flayed the body, kept the skin for weeks. It's just relentless.
And then May 91, Tony Hughes. He was deaf, communicated through notes. Dahmer injects acid into his skull, kills him, keeps the skull.
Yeah.
Targeting someone with a disability is just another layer of depravity.
And then there's Connor X Synthesumphone, only 14 years old, and his brother's the boy Dahmer had molested before. He drugs Synthesumphone, injects him with acid, but he doesn't die right away.
Some women find him naked and disoriented, call the police, and this is where things get really bad, even worse than they already were.
Right. The police come, they see Synthesumphone, he's clearly in distress, there's blood, but they actually return him to Dahmer. The women tried to tell them something was wrong, but they didn't listen.
The Wikipedia entry goes into this, how they were told about the blood, that Synthesumphone had been resisting Dahmer, but they still left him there. Dahmer injects him again and kills him. This whole thing sparked huge outrage, rightfully so. People accusing the police of being insensitive, especially towards the gay community and people of color.
It's a complete failure of the system. A 14-year-old boy, his life could have been saved. And after this, the killings just keep going. Matt Turner in June, Jeremiah Weinberger in July, Oliver Lacey in July, and then Joseph Breithoft, his final victim, also in July of 91. The details are all just horrific.
And then finally it ends. July 22nd, 1991, Tracy Edwards escapes from Dahmer's apartment. He had been handcuffed, but managed to get away and flag down the police.
And what they find in that apartment is just beyond belief. A decapitated head in the fridge, Polaroids everywhere of dismembered bodies, skulls, some painted or bleached, hearts, a torso and organs in the freezer, entire skeletons.
Severed hands, penises, a mummified scalp, torsos dissolving in acid in a 57-gallon drum. The medical examiner called it dismantling someone's museum. I mean, that says it all. 74 Polaroid pictures of his crimes.
It's just pure horror. And then he confesses, tells them everything. 17 murders, the druggings, the stranglings, the dismemberment, the necrophilia, the cannibalism. He even said he was saving the skulls and skeletons to make a private altar in his living room.
Charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, both in Wisconsin and Ohio. Pleads guilty, but insane in Wisconsin, which leads to this huge trial all about his mental state.
Right. The prosecution saying he was sane, planned everything out, and the defense arguing he was legally insane, driven by these mental disorders, the necrophilia, personality disorders, maybe even psychosis. The psychiatrist couldn't even agree on a diagnosis. It's so complex.
Dahmer himself said he didn't want to live, wished for death. He knew the harm he caused, believed it was all because of his mental illness, so that we found some kind of peace in that. Crazy, right?
Yeah. He's convicted in Wisconsin in February of 92, gets 15 life terms. Pleads guilty in Ohio in May 92 for Stephen Hicks's murder, gets another life term.
He's imprisoned, at first in solitary confinement, but later does cleaning duties. He even becomes a born-again Christian, gets baptized in May of 94.
And then, just a few months later, he's dead. Beaten to death by another inmate, Christopher Scarver, in November of 94.
Cremated, ashes split between his parents. There was this whole debate about whether to keep his brain for research. A vigil was held for the victims in Milwaukee. His estate was awarded to 11 of the families. They destroyed all his possessions, buried them.
And what about his family? It's hard to imagine what they went through. His dad, Lionel, he wrote a book, A Father's Story, even donated some of the money to the victims' families. Some of the families sued him, though. He and his wife, Shari, always said they loved Jeffrey, even after everything.
Yeah, it's tough to wrap your head around that. Joyce, his mom, died in 2000. And his brother, David, changed his name, lives completely off the grid. Understandable, right? Who would want to be associated with that?
Yeah. And it's important to remember that most of his victims, 17 in total, they were young men, mostly from ethnic minorities. Dahmer said race wasn't a factor for him, that he was just attracted to a certain body type, but it's hard to ignore that detail.
Especially with what happened with Conrad sent the some phone and the police. It just adds to the whole tragedy. And then there's all the media attention, the movies, the books, the documentaries. People are fascinated by this case, trying to understand how someone could do this.
Yeah. And the NIH paper, they go into the forensic analysis, how the investigation at his apartment was crucial to figuring out how he killed his victims, who they were, and how his mental state was deteriorating.
The autopsies confirmed the causes of death, documented all the injuries, even showed those drilled holes in the skulls. The anthropological examination helped identify victims and suggested that Dahmer did have a specific type he was attracted to. He even admitted to trying to create these zombie sex slaves by drilling into their skulls and injecting acid.
Unbelievable. Just horrific.
And from all of this, they built a psychological profile of him. Destructive tendencies, obsessed with these morbid trophies, deep-seated hostility that played out in these sadistic sexual acts. They said he started out like an organized serial killer, but then things got more and more chaotic.
Yeah, he was losing control.
Right.
And the whole sent the some phone incident, the way the police handled it, that just blew the lid off everything, exposed the flaws in the system, the biases. It's a story that stayed with Milwaukee, with the whole country, really.
It's a lot to take in. This deep dive, it's been tough going through all this information about Jeffrey Dahmer from the Wikipedia entry in the NIH paper. It's a story about a troubled kid who turned into a monster. And it makes you think, what went wrong? How did he fall through the cracks?
Exactly. We've tried to present all this as objectively as possible, just relaying the information from these sources, but it's heavy stuff, and it leaves you with so many questions. So I gotta ask you, our listeners, what sticks with you the most? What part of this story of Dahmer's life, his crimes, the way society reacted, what is the most unsettling or thought-provoking part for you?
Because this case, it really forces us to look at the darkest parts of humanity, and it makes you wonder about the systems we have in place. Are they really protecting us? It's something to think about for sure.
Yeah. Let us know what you think, what other deep dives you'd like to explore. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.